Hello, my name is Bonnie Burke, and this workshop is on interviews. How to prepare for an interview either in person or on the phone. You may have just been given a notice that your employer was going to have a large reduction in their workforce, or a plant closing, or you may already be unemployed. Finding a new job can be a full-time job in itself. Not too long ago, I lost my job. I had no idea how many hours I would spend looking for a job, creating and updating my resume, going to job fairs, and preparing for interviews. When was the last time you had an interview? It may have been years. Most people find interviews stressful. This workshop, along with the staff at Workforce Resource, will give you tips and tools to prepare for and follow up on an interview. I want to be able to give you a tool, and we're going to talk about what are some steps to prepare you for that interview. I had no idea what those steps were. Trust me, I wish I would have had the handout that I'm going to give you today. We're going to be able to practice some common interview questions. And one of your handouts is going to list the different common questions, and it will give you some suggestions for answers. And then also, we're going to talk about thank you notes and follow-up. Following up from an interview may be as critical as that resume and the interview itself was. So we're going to talk about those three things. Interviewing. Why is this so important? Well, keep this in mind. It's your resume and your cover letter that got you the interview, but it's the interview that's going to get you the job. Okay, now you understand, right? Interviews are important. So some of the steps to take for that successful interview, so you don't end up being a nervous wreck like Bonnie. So on your handout, the first thing that I tell everyone to do is research the company that you're being interviewed at. You may know someone that works there, so talk to them about the company and the job. The handout that I'm going to give you, and I hope that you can feel free to make copies of this and use this, is going to give you a guideline of different things to look up on the internet. Because yes, we are so blessed that we have the internet, because searching for employer information should maybe take you 10 minutes tops in today's world of internet. So what are the products that company makes? What is their mission statement, or what are their values? Who are some of their main customers? Can you tell by their website, what is their culture like? Do they have locations in different parts of the world? What's the reputation of the company? Have they received any rewards or any recognition? What are the company's plans for the future? Do they have information on their website that talks about growth and maybe starting in different locations or starting new product lines? What do you feel are the company's strengths and weaknesses? You may not get that piece of information from a website, but you definitely could find that information by speaking with somebody who currently works at the company. And then, why are you interested in working for this company? To me, that is a question that's going to be really important for you to have answered before you go into that interview. So I hope this handout will be just one tool that you can use to help do some research and get to know as much as you possibly can about that company before the interview starts. So just one tool of a few other tools that I'll be sharing with you today. So answer the following question. The hardest part of an interview for me is, well, the answer to that is different for everyone. But I have asked a few people that question. And most people have said, this is interesting how often I hear this same statement from people. The most difficult part of an interview for them is when the employer says, so Tell me about yourself. What can you do for me? The employer does not want to know when they say, tell me about yourself. They don't want to know that I have 9 grandchildren, I love to garden, I have a little business on the side. They don't want to know that stuff at all. They want to know, what are my qualifications? Does that sound familiar if you attended my resume workshop? They want to know your skills, your qualifications, and what you can do for them. So be prepared with the answer for that question, because statistically, many, many employers are going to ask. They may not come out and say, what can you do for me? But yet they may ask you, so tell me about yourself. And that's what they want to hear. So you must do more than just tell them what you've done. You have to be prepared to prove it. And that's where on that resume, in your research, to be able to say, I have worked for X amount of years, I have received training in, be very specific with the training, and be prepared with other evidence of things that you've done. On the top of my resume when I was job searching, one of the prove-its I put up there, which I was really, really proud of. My last job, I was involved in lean manufacturing, kind of like continuous improvement. Well, at the end of a calendar year, my organization, because of my leadership in lean, we saved the company $450,000. That was at the very top of my resume. Was I able to prove it? Absolutely. So in my interview, I was able to tell them how and what we did to save that much money. So be ready to prove it. So I also have one of the handouts for you today is called Prove It. I'm going to bring that up so you can take a look at it. This handout is typically kept out front on most job centers in the resource room. And it's from the Job Center of Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development. So Prove It is what I love about this handout. It's going to tell you, you might be surprised by how much you have forgotten. If you have worked for a couple of different employers and you're asked for specific information about what you did, hopefully this handout is going to give you some good questions to be prepared for at that interview. So Prove It. Now that you've thought through your accomplishment, don't hesitate to market those accomplishments to your employer, i.e. in your next interview. Step 2, it is so important to practice. And if you are working with someone at the job centers, you can ask them to schedule some time for you to come in to do a mock interview, or you can even practice with some friends or family. Make a list of your strengths. You can use the handout that we gave in the resume class. So with those lists of strengths, be prepared to talk about them and be comfortable with it. Be prepared for behavior-based questions. Most interview questions will go something like this. Tell me about a time when, and I'll give you an example. Tell me about a time when you saved money for the company you last worked with. Tell me about a time when you were upset with your supervisor. How did you handle it? How did you resolve it? So these are behavior-based questions. They give that employer an opportunity to really get to know you, yet you really have to think on your feet with behavior-based questions. They're not just as simple as, do you know how to weld? Yep, I know how to weld. They're wanting to get to know you. So another handout that I have for you today is called Interview Questions and Handout and Follow-Up. What I love about this handout is it's going to give you examples of questions and then give you examples of answers. This one was my personal favorite. So once again, tell me about yourself. You want to talk about stability, your interests that relate to the jobs. You want to talk about your positive qualities. What are your future plans is a common interview question. Well, if your future plans is to work in customer service and yet you're applying for a job in welding, you might not want to bring that up. The employer wants to know what is your future plans working for their company and growing with their company. So Another question that I really like on this handout, it says, have you ever done this type of work before? And if your honest answer is no, you can be very creative with your answer. You can say, well, you know what, I've never done this type of work before. However, I have done other similar things, and be prepared to fill in the blank with those similar things examples are. So you may have gained other experience through volunteer work and through education as well. So never say no when they ask, have you done this type of work before? So hopefully this will be a good tool for your toolbox. I want you to look at the questions on that handout. And then I want you to take some time, and you can do this when you come home or at home after the webinar today. Highlight the questions that are the most challenging for you. If you read through those and you're like, yep, I get it, I'm not nervous, you may not need to do this activity. But I so encourage you to read through each one of those questions. Read the suggested answer, and then practice it with a friend or, like I said, a workforce resource case manager. This piece, once again, has always been the most difficult for me and a lot of the clients that I've worked for. Tell me about yourself. I'm going to talk about this again because this is one that frequently stumbles a lot of people. They want you to keep your answer brief. They want you to keep it job related. They may want you to mention education, training, what you have done that's going to relate or benefit that company. So tell me about yourself. If I were doing an interview today, I would tell them that I worked for Workforce Resource for over 4 years. I was a consultant and I did extensive amount of training. I would go into detail on the different types of training that I facilitated. So keep it work related. Reassert that you are very interested in the job and working for that company. What are your weaknesses? This is a question also that I know has really tripped a lot of people. Because if you say, you know what, I don't have any weaknesses, wrong. We're all human. We all have weaknesses. And so if an employer says, tell me about your weaknesses, the tip that I want you to always remember is never hesitate being honest with your weakness, but then also talk next what you've done to improve or work around it. My example of weaknesses is I have a really difficult time paying attention to details. So to work around that, anytime I have created curriculum, I have somebody else proof it for me. I have a friend who is amazing, and I have her proof it because I know that my weakness is attention to detail. So be prepared to talk about a weakness, but then also describe what you're doing to improve it. What are your weaknesses? So I want you to take a minute now and then just jot down 1 or 2 weaknesses. Okay. It's a hard one, isn't it? Most of us don't want to admit, yep, we have some weaknesses. Next, I want you to turn this into a positive by stating how you overcame it or what you're doing to overcome it. I have that friend who's my proofreader, right? So what are you doing to work around it? You may need a little bit more time to do that, so my challenge to you, if you haven't finished, take that one home with you. I'm going to talk about phone interviews or video interviews. In today's technology, many employers are going to do a phone interview first. They do that as a way of weeding out candidates. It saves them time. Doesn't that sound cruel? They're weeding us out. But that's exactly what they're doing. If they have 10 people applying for the same job, they may not have time to bring all 10 people in for an interview. So with the phone interview, it's very brief. It's going to give them a chance to ask you some key questions, and depending on your answers will depend on whether or not you get a face-to-face interview. So make sure your phone is charged. and that you have good reception. With today's world, with our cell phones, if you say, yes, I'm available for a phone interview at 4:30, at 4:30, you better look down and that you have all bars on your cell phone, that you have reception, and that your phone is charged. I'm passionate about those two things because guess what? That happened to me. You bet it did. I had a phone interview. I picked up the phone. I was in my van. I'd pulled over because I knew what time the phone call was coming in. I looked down. Oh, shoot. My battery was dying. So I found the things. I plugged it in. I thought, okay, I saved it. Then I looked down and like, oh, I only had 1 bar. So I'm driving and driving, trying to get more bars. It was the craziest day. I cannot believe I got a second interview. The whole time, I'm trying to sound like I'm calm and relaxed and that I've got this thing covered. Would have been much easier if I had been prepared. So, remember I told you I was in the car? Not a good idea. Check for background noises. And if anything in the background could be distracting. Do you live near a railroad track? Do you have children at home or dogs? So making sure that what the employer is going to hear is going to be your voice and not distracting. Have your resume and a list of your questions in front of you. Have your resume, maybe your cover letter, any of your professional documents, have that right there. So when they ask you questions, you can refer to your resume and be able to answer it clearly. Don't hang up until you've asked or you know what is the next step in the interview process. That employer may say, you know what, we have a few more people to call, we'll call you back. And you can ask for a date. Say, can you tell me approximately when will you be making your decision? Or can you tell me what will be the next step in the process? The other piece that I forgot to mention is focus on not only the tone of your voice, yet your language. If you typically talk really fast, or if you talk typically slow with a lot of ums, ands, well, you may want to practice before you get that phone interview. So hopefully that will give you a few tips because many employers are using phone interviews. The other video that I have down in the right-hand corner of my screen could be from Snapchat or FaceTime. If an employer is going to interview someone who lives hundreds of miles away, instead of just a phone interview, they may ask you to do a face-to-face interview using the internet. It's becoming very popular. It saves that person time and it saves the employer a lot of time and money as well. So it may be an option for some of the jobs you're applying for. So be ready to answer some of the difficult questions. This video that I'm going to have you watch, once again, I hope it's brings a smile to your face, but listen to some of the answers that these people are giving. I think these are college students that are doing mock interviews, yet I think it's going to re-emphasize how important being prepared for an interview is. I hope you enjoy this video.
Why have I had so many jobs? I get bored easily.
I'm really not a morning person.
You're not?
No.
Okay.
So tell me, why do you want this job?
Why do I want this job?
What do you consider your greatest strength?
My greatest strength is chilling with the coworkers, you know?
Hold on just a sec.
I don't want to do anything boring.
There's no drug testing here, right?
Man, I hop from job to job. As soon as it bored me, I'm gone.
Why do I want this job? Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I got nothing.
What can I offer? That's the question. I can bring sexy back. Yeah. That was a good one, right? That was a good one, right? Yeah.
So why should we hire you?
I need some extra money to pay off some gambling debt.
Do you really?
Hey, how are you? Oh, that sounds great.
So what do you think? Would you ever bring a phone to an interview? No. This lady was even talking on the phone during her interview. Leave the phone in the car. So I'm going to share with you a few other tricky interview questions. When you read this, you're going to think, really? Trust me, these questions do get asked. So think of this question. If you were an animal, what would you be? Yep, that is an interview question. What they're looking for is character. So tailor your answer to the job you are applying for. For example, if you're applying for a job that requires you to interact well with people, outgoing, friendly, you might say you want to be a dog. It's absolutely fine to smile when you get asked some of those tricky interview questions. It's absolutely fine to say, you know what? I've never thought about that. Do you mind if we come back to that question? I need a little while to think about that. I have another tricky interview question for you. If we shrunk you the size of a pencil and put you in a blender, how would you get out? Yikes. You're the size of a pencil, you're in a blender, you want to get out before someone turns it on. How would you do it? Why they ask a question like that is they're asking about your creativity. Can you think on your feet? What are your problem-solving skills? So this is when I've asked other people that question. That one really stumps them because they're like, do I have an eraser? If I have an eraser, maybe I would bounce out. But be creative. So here's another one. Name 5 uses for a stapler without staples. Well, I could use it as a hammer. I could use it as a paperweight. What would you come up with? What they're asking is, can you think outside the box? So even if you don't come up with 5, try to come up with as many as you can. Problem solving, creativity, all of those soft skills are very important in almost every job. So, topics that should not be discussed in an interview. Sometimes employers do not know all of the interview laws or do's and don'ts. Or sometimes you may be getting an interview with a brand new supervisor who's never had any training on how to interview. So technically, an employer should never ask you, are you married or do you have children? With that information, if a person, let's just say for an example, if they have 5 children, the employer may think, whoa, do they have daycare arranged? That person's going to miss a lot of work, right? You know, sick kids, school activities. They're not supposed to ask that question. Another topic that should not be discussed with an interview is, do you have daycare set up for your children? Of course, they might be thinking it if you have 5 children, yet they should not be asking that question. What is your spouse's name and your spouse's line of work? Well, they might just be getting to know you. They might just be being friendly. However, if your spouse works for a competitor, that may be a time that they're going to end that interview, and they don't want that type of relationship. So if you are uncomfortable with a question that an employer asked during an interview, it's absolutely fine to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable talking about that now. Here's another one. Have you ever filed a workers' compensation claim or been injured on the job? Well, if your job is going to be in a high-risk area, let's just say construction, and if you have had an injury, you do not have to divulge that to your employer. What they can ask, and this is the legal term, they can ask you, can you perform the essential functions of this job? This job requires you to be on your feet 10 hours a day. It requires you to lift 50 pounds. It requires you to walk, drive equipment. Can you perform the essential functions of this job with or without accommodations? The with or without accommodations is actually a law from the Americans with Disabilities Act. So once again, they can't ask you, do you have a bad back? They can ask you, can you do this job? So they're not supposed to ask you, what's your height and weight? Well, they can kind of tell by looking, right? There are not too many jobs where our height or weight would affect our job. Another question, have you ever been treated for drug addiction or alcoholism? Once again, many employers will do pre-employment drug testing or drug and alcohol testing. That's absolutely legal. However, they cannot ask you, have you been treated for an addiction? So, personal questions that do not relate to the job should not be asked. And so once again, if you get asked questions and you're comfortable answering them, if your instincts are telling you, I don't care, I'll tell them, where my husband works, I'm absolutely fine with that, go ahead and answer it. Yet, if a little yellow flag comes up and you think internally, I'm not comfortable with this, it's absolutely fine to say, I'm not really comfortable with that question. Can we talk about some work-related questions? So, another step, be prepared. It is so important. And my first thing is to bring, it doesn't have to be a fancy portfolio like you can see on my slide, but some type of binder that you will have in there, your resume, your cover letter, any copies of letters of recommendation, copies of work that you have done. So in that portfolio, you are going to look so professional instead of trying to bring these papers in with you and now shuffling them all around. In that interview, don't just bring one copy of your resume. I encourage you to bring at least 2 or 3 copies of your resume, because chances are you will be interviewed by more than one person. Yikes. My most stressful interview, I walked into the room, and thankfully they told me this ahead of time. I was interviewed by 6 people at one interview, all at the same time. Let me tell you, my antiperspirant had wore out by the end of that interview. Yet I knew it ahead of time, so emotionally I was as prepared as I could be. I did bring each of them a copy of my resume. So you might think, well, didn't they see your resume before the interview? You don't know that for sure. HR may have arranged the interview, and yet the supervisor may not have even seen it yet. So bring along those letters of recommendations once again, and your references. If your job requires you to have specific license or certificates, bring those with you as well. And then, when appropriate, examples of your work. And that's where having that portfolio, having something professional to carry those in with you, will look professional. The other piece in that portfolio that I would encourage you to bring is a notepad. It's absolutely fine to have things written down on a notepad. A friend of mine had a very stressful interview, and she was telling me that she had a lot of behavior-based interviews. So that employer was asking her, tell me about a time when, and they were 2- and 3-part questions. She was so nervous. She kept forgetting to answer the second or the third part of that question. So she asked the interviewer, do you mind if I take out my notepad? I'd like to jot some things down so I can remember your question and answer it to the best of my ability. She got the job offer. That employer told her that her wanting to write things down, wanting to answer the questions the best of her ability was what really impressed them. So bring in that portfolio, bring that notebook in as well. Another step to be prepared for is your salaried range. During the first interview, unless the employer brings up wage and benefits, do not talk about them. Do not ask about wages during the first interview. However, if they do ask, what is your salaried range? Be prepared. Oftentimes, some people will say, I'm open. So does open mean you'll take $7.50 an hour? Or open mean that I'll take whatever you guys are offering me? So you can do some research on the computers at the job centers and look up a website called O-Net, O-N-E-T. And on that website, you'll be able to find the salaried range for almost any occupation you can think of. If you need help with that, always ask the resource specialist in the resource room. They should be able to help you with that as well. So know what days and hours you're available. If you can't work weekends, be prepared to be able to talk about that, why, and during that interview. Be prepared also to be positive about your previous employer. Remember I said earlier that I'd lost my job? Well, the same day I lost my job, so did 15 other people. It was a huge downsizing. Did I think positively about my employer? It took me a long time to get an attitude adjustment. However, in my interviews, I always talked about the economy. It was 2008, the recession was really, really strong. So not only did I lose my job, so did other people. And no matter what, never talk negative about a past employer. Because if you do, if I would say to them, yeah, you know, they laid me off. I gave them 13 years of the best 13 years of my life. I don't understand it. I could have driven their forklift. Well, do you think they would have given me the job offer? Chances are no. They would rather you just talk about this is what happened and this is what I've done since. So in your handout, I have another handout for you. Some questions you can ask an employer. I want you to read through that because once again, remember at the beginning of our webinar, I talked about and gave you a handout on doing research for the company. Almost every single interview, the interviewer is going to ask you, so what questions do you have for me? And if you say, I don't have any, it shows that employer that you didn't do your homework. It may also give them a signal that you really don't care about their company. So some examples to be prepared for, you could ask, so what are the essential functions of this job? What are the tasks that I'll be required to do? Are there chances for career growth within your company? Where do you see the company going within the next 5 years? One question that people used to ask that an HR person said, I think you should put a bold line over this and recommend people do not ask this question. So it used to say, could you tell me why the job is open? And if the job is open because someone was terminated or lost their job, it could be very uncomfortable for the HR person. So I would stay away from that question. An HR person actually encouraged me to tell people, don't ask why the job is open. You could say, hey, is this a new position? And leave it at that. So good. Be prepared to ask questions about the company. So picture yourself getting the job. I love this little picture. I have used it before in some of my presentations. But when you go into that interview, if you're prepared, if you've done your research, if you've done your mock interview practicing, when you walk in there, walk in with confidence and picture yourself getting the job. I don't know if anyone likes sports, but if I was playing baseball, one of the things that that baseball player does is they prepare, they get ready, they have the right equipment, and they keep their eye on the ball. They see themselves hitting that ball, and they see themselves getting a home run. So mentally, see yourself doing a great job with that interview, and mentally see yourself getting that job interview. Another step that I want to talk about preparing is our personal clothing and our attire. So I'm going to talk about men first, but don't worry, ladies, I have a couple of tips for you as well. Number one, choose the appropriate clothing, depending on the job you're applying for. If the job you're applying for, if people are allowed to wear blue jeans and t-shirts, as an example, well, dress one level higher. So blue jeans and maybe a button-up shirt. So make sure that your blue jeans do not have holes in. I know that's in style right now, but have nice, clean denim and a nice button-up shirt. Wear a suit when applying for a manager or a business position. For an example, if you were going to apply for a position as a maintenance technician and you walk into that interview in a suit, the employer might think, is this person really going to be able to get their hands dirty, greasy, climb under machines, throughout the day. They might think you're not the right person for that position. If you have facial hair, I so encourage you, you don't have to shave your beard, but trim it. Get a haircut. It might be expensive, but it might be money well worth spent. Use deodorant, antiperspirant, and no cologne. I am always surprised how many people today have allergies to certain fragrances. And avoid not only coffee breath, but if you smoke, smoker's breath. So get some mouthwash, get some mints, and don't smoke or drink coffee before that interview. Another step that I wanted to show, I found a few pictures that I wanted to add to this presentation. Because look at the difference of doing something so simple as tucking a shirt in. So this gentleman has a button-up shirt, which I think is really professional looking. However, just tucking it in adds that one more step of professionalism. This picture I know might be a little bit hard to see, but we'll zoom in on it and hope that you can see the difference. Kind of divide this man right in half. So the left hand is clean, crisp shirt. His pants are pressed. He really looks nice. And trust me, I hate to iron, but for a job interview, I get out my rusty iron and my ironing board. The other side of him, his shirt is rumpled, and that can easily happen even with a seat belt. His pants, they look like he maybe pulled them out of the laundry hamper. So make sure that your clothes are pressed, that they look professional. Have a t-shirt on underneath your shirt, and then wear a belt and some clean shoes. But once again, if you were applying for a maintenance technician, you would not have to have the nice khaki pants. Denims would be absolutely fine. So body art is so popular in today's world. So one of my encouragements for you, if you have body art, is for tattoos, if at all possible, and depending on the job, cover it with your clothing. For an example, if you were applying for a job as a bartender, and you knew that tattoos was absolutely fine and appropriate in that place, you wouldn't have to cover them. However, to be on the safe side, I still would encourage you to. The person with the earring, very popular. Lots of facial piercings, very popular. If possible, I would encourage you to take it out for the interview. I'm going to talk about women next. Once again, talk about your clothing. I'm going to give you a couple pictures in another slide to show you some appropriate clothing. Once again, use deodorant, but no cologne. Wear closed-toed shoes. Well, in another couple weeks, we aren't going to have to worry about that. It's going to be cold in Wisconsin. However, if you have an interview and it's the spring and the summertime, when you normally do wear sandals, to an interview, always make sure that you are wearing a closed-toed shoe. It's one simple step of just showing professionalism. Minimal or even no jewelry, depending on the position. Jobs such as in healthcare, if your job is in a restaurant, hospitality, oftentimes you cannot wear jewelry. So be very cognizant of the requirements for the job that you're applying for. Minimal makeup. I know the older I get, sometimes a little bit of makeup kind of hides those wrinkles, but minimal is the key. Check your nails. I am a crazy gardener in this time of year. I'm getting rid of all the weeds and pulling out all my tomato plants and saying a little goodbye cry as I'm doing it, but my hands always look awful. If you have a job interview, do a light polish or no polish at all, but just making sure that your hands are clean, and that's the only thing that should really matter. Neat hairstyle. Well, that's kind of subjective, yet take a look at what do people who work in that facility, how do they wear their hair? Is it always back? Is it always up? And if it is, chances are it's for a reason. Have no undergarment showing. With some of our tops, especially for spring and summer, we have very thin tops, just making sure that bra straps aren't showing, and then no cleavage as well. Lots of tips for women. It seems almost a little bit harder, right? Well, this example, I really liked it when I found it, because she's dressed over here on the yellow top and her heels. I kept thinking when I looked at her, what type of job is she applying for? If it's in like hospitality or tourism, maybe, but she has heels. I would say wear flats. Her toes are open. I'd say wear a closed-toed shoe. I would say wear long pants and not a capri. Get rid of the big colorful handbag and the big necklace. And just look at the difference. Same woman, just dressed 2 different styles. But once again, if her job is in manufacturing, she could do a nice sweater like that in blue jeans, which would be absolutely acceptable. So know the type of business that you are going to be interviewing for and dress accordingly. One rule of thumb is dress 1 level higher. I love these 2 pictures. And granted, it's 2 different women, but look at the difference. The woman who has her hair tied back, the white button-up shirt, compared to the other woman. She looks absolutely fine, the lady in black and the blue jeans, yet the other woman looks a little bit more professional, and chances are it didn't cost her any additional money. Maybe a nice new white shirt. So the interview itself, a few tips. Be there early, but not too early. My husband has the saying, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. Well, for an interview, you don't want to be more than 10 minutes early. If you get there 30 minutes early and they're not ready for you, it kind of throws a wrench in their day, so to speak. So be about 10 minutes early. Remember that the interview starts when you drive into the parking lot. Right. Some people actually look at the type of vehicle you drive. They're looking to say, do you have children in the car? Do you have dogs in the car? Is your car clean? Be polite to the receptionist. That person who greets you will be asked later on, so what did you think? And then also, the first 5 minutes of an interview are critical. It's absolutely fine to say, you know what, I'm a little nervous here. And if you start stumbling or forgetting things, absolutely fine to say, you know what, I just need to get a quick glass of water and I'd like to start over. Smile and a firm handshake. Keep this in mind. This is a true story. In my last job, I was helped in human resources a little bit, but every person that I, as an HR person, interviewed, our plant manager said he wanted to meet them also. And I was like, really? You're a pretty busy guy. Don't you trust me? And he said, oh, I trust you. What I want to do is I want to shake their hand. I'm like, okay. So every interview, I had to page him. He would meet me in the hallway, not even in his office. He would extend his hand, and what he was gauging for, did the person have a firm, professional handshake, or was it wimpy? Or was it all slimy or sticky for something they just ate? And did they smile with confidence and look them in the eye? He said if they did not smile with confidence, if they did not look them in the eye, if they were shifting their feet and looking on the floor, if they had a wimpy handshake, he would send me an email with thumbs down. He'd say, I trust your choice, but I'm going to tell you, from my experience, they're not going to work out. 90% of the time, he was right. Every once in a while, I didn't listen to his advice, but keep in mind that handshake, those first few minutes, that first impression is really important. The other piece of that, however, to be aware of is there are several cultures who do not like to be looked in the eye. There are several cultures where a handshake, especially with a woman, can be looked at as being impolite. So know the culture of the company and who will be interviewing you. That may be a helpful tip for there. So, the interview. When you walk in and you shake their hand, address them as Mr. or Ms. fill in the blank. If you know their first name, always initially address them by Mr. or Ms. Chances are they're going to correct you right away, yet it just shows professionalism. Always, always thank them for their time. Ask them when they're going to make their decision, and then ask for a business card. You might think, why do I want one of their business cards? You want that business card so that you have the correct spelling of their name, their correct mailing, and phone number. Because the next thing that I'm going to talk about is after that interview, follow-up is so important. When I say follow-up, I mean a thank you note. I don't mean you have to go down to the drugstore and buy a $5 Hallmark card. any type of handwritten note is very powerful, or even a typed thank you note. I'm going to show you a few examples of a thank you note that you can send. If the employer says, we will be making our decision in about 3 to 5 days, well, you definitely would have time to go home, write or type that thank you note, and mail it. However, if they say, you know what, we're going to make our decision within the next day or two, on that business card, you now have their email address. You could email them a follow-up email and thanking them for the interview. It demonstrates your interest and your initiatives. If you haven't heard back from the employer after about 3 to 5 business days, and the employer did say they would be making their decision within that time frame, it's appropriate to call as a follow-up. Be brief, be polite, and be positive. So, thank you letters, impressive and courteous. An employer will look at that thank you note to say, this person is really, really interested. It can also set you aside from other job seekers. Should be brief, but in there, it's one more opportunity to get your name in front of them and to remind them of the skills that you have. My supervisor told me about an employer in our area who had 2 interview candidates, almost equal qualifications. They both did very, very well in the interview, and they were really struggling on which one to make the job offer to. How they made their decision was by the person who sent them the thank you note. That person got the job offer. So something so simple that might take you 5 to 10 minutes can be very powerful. And it's also an indicator of your interest, your motivation. So look at this sample of a thank you note. Once again, address them by Mr. or Ms. Put the date, your address, and it's just 2 simple paragraphs. Thank you for the consideration that you've shown me, thanking them for taking the time. Interviews do take sometimes an hour to 2 hours out of that person's day. And once again, re-emphasize your skills, your qualifications to do that job, and thank them and say, you know what, I hope to hear from you again in the future. And sincerely print it, sign it, mail it. It can be a very, very powerful tool as a follow-up to that interview. So there's just one example that I wanted to share with you today. On the internet, there are several other examples of thank you notes that you could send an employer as a follow-up to an interview. So we talked today about how to prepare for an interview. We talked about what is the hardest part of an interview for you, how to dress, what to do with those tattoos, what type of documentation should you bring with you, and the importance of being early and not too early. Interviews today can be the one piece that can either give you that job offer or can make that employer shake their head and say, nope, not the right person for this job. The one piece that I do want you to keep in mind is if you have been turned down for a job and you felt, oh, I know I have the qualifications, and you thought the interview went well, I would encourage you to call the employer. If you're interested in the company, if you're passionate about that job opening, it's absolutely appropriate to say, I was so excited about your company. Could you please share with me some of the skills or qualifications that I was missing? Because in the future, if there are job openings with your company, I want to be as prepared as I can. And trust me, most employers will tell you. They're not going to tell you who got the job, but they might say, you know what, I felt you needed to build your skills in, and they'll fill in the blanks. It can be a tool that can be so valuable for you. Because remember, no to an interview means no now. It doesn't mean no when another job opening comes up within that company. It is discouraging to get a letter as a follow-up to an interview that says, thank you for your time, we have chosen someone else, those standard letters. However, I'd prefer getting those letters, and for some employers, they don't send the letter and they don't call, and that's normal as well. But brush yourself off, get yourself back to that resume and job searching, because what that means is you've just had an amazing experience that you've learned from, and now you can do better with the next interview. I did a little research and I wanted to share with you the information on this slide, because what I found out was why employers feel they were not able to choose specific people for the job. So why people don't get hired is how this article was titled. Poor appearance, overly aggressive, lack of self-confidence, poor eye contact. I think my plant manager had something to do there. Late for an interview, cardinal sin, don't ever be late. Lack of tact and courtesy, that please and thank you are very important. And the application or resume was incomplete or sloppy. For a sloppy resume, you might get an interview, yet if that sloppiness is carried over into that interview, the employer may really say, nope, not quite the right person for us. So look at the number one bullet point, poor personal appearance. This is something that we can all perfect and work on for our job interviews. So take a look at this list. Be prepared for all of these with your next interview. So practice, practice, practice. So some of the questions that I would encourage you to practice are, tell me about yourself, and what is your strongest attribute? Remember once again, that employer wants to hear what you can do for them. If you need to do more practice, I would encourage you to contact your case manager, if you have one, at the job centers and ask to schedule a mock interview. I have sat in on some mock interviews and they have been so helpful. The person at the job center or the case manager will act just like the hiring manager. He or she will ask very specific interview questions. They will ask that you come in dressed for an interview and prepared for an interview, and then you'll get feedback and comments after the mock interview. Powerful tool, especially if you haven't had a recent interview. It can put you more at ease when you actually do have that interview. So, quick review of the information that we covered. List 2 things you should do to be prepared for an interview. Well, remember that research for that company. Use that sheet. Do your research. Do your homework. Make sure that you have appropriate clothes. Make sure that you have all your documents and that they're very neat and put together in a portfolio or folder. What should you bring to an interview? Well, I've just mentioned one. Bring your resume and copies of your resume. If you have letters of recommendations, if you have samples of some of the work that you have done, bring those as well. Oftentimes, if a person has been given a job interview with their last jobs, and if it was a very positive job review, bring a copy of your job review with you to the interview. What a powerful way to prove it that you've done a great job with your last job. So, another review question. What question should you ask at the end of the interview? Remember, don't ask about wage and salary for the first interview. A question you can ask is, can you tell me when you will be making your decision for this position? Another question, may I have a copy of your business card, please? Another question could be, is to be prepared with questions that are related to that employer, their history, their products, their customers. What steps should you take after the interview? Remember, it doesn't end when you walk out that door. Steps could be a follow-up phone call within 3 to 5 business days. Another step to take is that thank you letter or that thank you email, following up, reiterating your strengths and your qualities. So we've talked about a lot of information today, not only just face-to-face interviews, but phone interviews and also video interviews. I hope that you've been able to take away at least 1 or 2 things that's going to help you in your next job interview. Workforce Resource hopes the information from this workshop was helpful for you. We are here to provide you with any further assistance you may need. Contact us to even schedule a mock interview. If you are not currently enrolled in our services, please contact us at your local job center or complete our application online. Once you are on our homepage, just click Job Seekers Application. Losing a job is never easy. Workforce Resource is here to help. Thank you so much for attending this presentation on interviews. I hope the information that we covered will be helpful for you in your next interview. Thank you again, and have a great day.